Can I welcome everyone to the first Police and Crime Committee meeting of this Assembly year. This morning we will be holding our regular monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the recent attacks directed at London's Jewish community. The committee condemns these unacceptable incidents and remains deeply concerned about their impact. We have written to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service to recognise the efforts and swift response of the officers. In this vein, I would also like to comment on the significant protests that took place across London this weekend. We fully recognise the importance of the right to peaceful protest. However, since the weekend, the Assembly has received a substantial number of messages of concern from the public regarding the policing operations at Saturday's Nakba March. I, of course, thank the officers and staff involved for managing what was clearly a challenging operational situation. But it is also important for us as a committee to scrutinise and understand how these operations were conducted and to ensure that any concerns raised by the public are properly addressed. Before we continue, I'd like to remind everybody, please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Sal Faisal, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies for absence have been received.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations as set out on item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Right, thank you. I propose that we take agenda items 3, 4 and 5 together. Can I ask the committee to note its membership and chairing arrangements, its terms of reference and the standing delegations of authority to me as chairman, as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 11th of May 2026. Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 11th of March and 26th of March 2026 to be signed by me as correct records? Agreed. Thank you. Can we note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent and received? Nearly finished. Can we note the action taken by the former chair of the committee under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree the committee's report, Hate, Crime and Violence Against Women and Girls on London's Public Transport? Thank you. Can we note the responses received to the committee outputs as listed in the agenda report? Yeah, thank you. So we now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Matt Jukes, Deputy Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police Service, and Kaya Comer-Schwartz, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. Welcome both, and thank you so much for coming. Right, our first questions are going to be on the attacks to London's Jewish community. So my question will be to you both. What action is being taken to address the growing risk of individuals being recruited or financially incentivized by hostile foreign states to conduct criminal activity in London? Matt, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. And if I may just thank the committee for this opportunity and welcome everyone back to the new Assembly year, new members to the committee, and congratulate the former member on her election to the position of Mayor of Hackney. So change of the committee all recognised. Turning to your question, Chair, and welcoming you to that role, can I start by saying that we have seen what has been an unprecedented period of threat to the Jewish community in London, evidenced by the increase in anti-Semitic hate crime, which has occurred since October 2023, but brought into extraordinary and stark relief by events since the 23rd of March. The 23rd of March, you will recall, is the date on which the Hatzler volunteer-led ambulance services in Golders Green were attacked. And what has followed has been 7 weeks of sustained attacks directed at the Jewish community, principally through 8 arson incidents or attempted arsons which have taken place and of course the more recent terrible stabbing incidents. In relation to your question directly, I want to underline the breadth and complexity of the response. So it extends to, of course, protective security operations and engagement with communities. We're deploying still over 1,000 additional officer shifts into communities as protective security, and as a result of that, we've been able to detect and prevent some of the damage that might have occurred in a number of those instances. So at Kenton United Synagogue, for example, it was patrolling officers who were part of that protective security who responded first to that incident. The investigations themselves into the possibility of coordinated or state initiated or state-sponsored activity are being led out by counter-terrorism policing. Counter-terrorism policing in London, across the United Kingdom, the network of officers responsible for national security policing, principally the terrorist threat, but increasingly the threat from hostile state actors. In terms of the 11 investigations being led out by counter-terrorism policing, 35 arrests have been made so far. And 11 individuals have been charged and 1 has been convicted. So if I go back to the 23rd of March, moving at extraordinary pace since then, 35 arrests, 11 charges and 1 conviction already in that period. I could break down into further detail how that applies to the individual cases if it will help the committee. It is clear those incidents are not isolated. They're not isolated in terms of anti-Semitic hate crime, which has taken place over the last years, targeting Jewish communities here and indeed around the globe and across Europe. And whilst it remains for my colleagues in counter-terrorism policing to conclude their investigations, those investigations still, in every case, very much ongoing. The question of whether there are state actors or their proxies behind these crimes remains a serious and substantial line of inquiry.
Okay. Kaya.
Thank you. I'd like to add that obviously, as a Jewish woman myself, it has been a very stressful and upsetting time for the Jewish community, especially in a city where we've always been proud to live and cherish its diversity. As Matt has said, these appalling anti-Semitic attacks, both arson, but obviously the stabbing of Shlomi Rand and Moshe Shine in Golders Green, and the recent violent attack too, has put additional pressure on the Jewish community that obviously was already heightened due to global events. And this combination that the Deputy Commissioner spoke to of both violent extremism and hostile state threat means that it's right that we have seen the additional thousands of patrols around synagogues, Jewish schools and venues, especially in northwest London. I want to thank, I know, I'm sure all of you have heard as well, a lot of thanks from the Jewish community to the Metropolitan Police for the level of reassurance that they have received. As Matt has outlined, there have been more than 80 arrests in the last 4 weeks in relation to both the attacks but also anti-Semitic crimes. Moreover, in direction to your question, Chair, I want to also reassure members, as the Chair of the Contest Board, we brought together an extraordinary Contest Board, partly so that the partnership can fully understand the nature of the current threat, but also so that we can make sure that we are passing on any key messages, both in schools, but moreover in our community, about the seriousness in which the police are taking this, especially as it's being led out by counter-terrorism, and to make sure that those messages that anyone who thinks of getting involved in these activities will face the full force of the law.
Well, I hope they do face the full force of the law, because my Jewish friends don't feel safe at all. And I know we're going to be talking about the marches later, so I won't go into that at the moment. But I think it's shocking that one community has to lock its kids behind doors, has to go into synagogue, through double locked doors so that they're not attacked. I think it's utterly atrocious, and they don't feel reassured, and that is half the problems. We'll go on to the next question. Assemblymember Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Deputy Mayor, could I also acknowledge how difficult a time this is for you, your family, and for the Jewish community? It is absolutely appalling, and you know that this committee in London are very much with you. Could I ask you both, in what ways are the Met and MOPAC ensuring Jewish Londoners feel safe reporting incidents, in particular lower level harassment and intimidation, particularly in the light of the decision last year by the Met to decide not to record or investigate non-crime incidents? Could we start with you, Deputy Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have heard in synagogues and community settings across the last years the reality of the prevalence of anti-Semitism as experienced by our Jewish communities. To put that in context, I mean, I sat in shul and synagogue on a Friday night in one of the locations that had been targeted by these arsons as a young girl was preparing for a bat mitzvah the next day, and she had to go through that rite of passage and that important milestone in her life whilst the community around her were also enduring this pressure and intimidation. And so that very real experience is vividly brought to life in all those conversations, and we seek to capture those to be really clear by an investment in putting people into neighbourhood policing in a way which will be extraordinary. So we are placing 100 additional officers into Golders Green and Stamford Hill principally, increasing and dedicating detectives to the investigation of hate crime and creating central capacity to ensure the standards of the investigations of those hate crimes in ways which we have never done in such an applied and focused way. So this is over and above our wider neighbourhood policing offer, which seeks to do many of those things already. We know that the reporting of signal incidents will be an important part of that, and recording events as intelligence where we see things which fall short of the criminal threshold will absolutely be part of our understanding the experience of communities. And we do that not alone, but we do that significantly in partnership with organisations like Shomrim and like the Community Security Trust, the CST, who provide us regular reporting of the experience of communities, including those experiences which might not reach the threshold of a crime. But I should be clear, almost all of those things which are often cited by people around their concerns can be investigated and recorded as crimes. So if people are being harassed, feel intimidated, feel unsafe, have been assaulted, property has been damaged, those are all crimes, and those will attract investigation. What we will not do in relation to non-crime hate incidents is treat incidents which fall below the criminal threshold as if they were crimes and investigating in the same way to focus necessarily our resources on those, sadly, those incidents which have seen significant increases where there is a real prospect of bringing perpetrators to justice.
Can I just ask you then, Deputy Commissioner, so you're saying, so you've now called them signal incidents. Where is the demarcation? At what point do you not record? Can you give an example?
So I mean, what's clear is incidents of damage, assault, threats, all of those things are captured by the criminal law, and we don't need to draw a very fine demarcation. There are questions, particularly in the online space, about freedom of speech and the balance between what is contentious and often offensive but doesn't amount to an offence. To be clear also, we recognise that the context for that has shifted over the last years. And so in relation to protest activity in particular, You have seen us change our position in relation to things which might have been acknowledged, were tested with the Crown Prosecution Service previously, but were not prosecuted as crimes, which are now being treated as such because of the cumulative effects on the community. So an example would be the chant "Globalise the Intifada," which we are clear now, people using that language, and there are examples of arrests at the weekend in relation to that. There are individuals who have now been charged in relation to that. So we are seeing behaviours in their context, and that part of that context is the cumulative effects on communities. There are instances where people are critical, blasphemous, all of those things which are tolerated within our legislation, but which form part of an experience of intimidation for communities. They feel that rising sense of hostility, and we will know and understand that and continue to track communities' experience of that and reactions to that. Our focus, sadly, has to be on an increasing number of anti-Semitic hate crimes and also on the hate crimes experienced by other communities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Assembly Member Ahmed. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I wanted to add as well to the work that Matt has outlined, the work that we've been doing for a long time now to make sure that anyone who has been a victim of hate crime can report. So we have the Catch Consortium, which is 10 organisations working together to support all victims of hate crime, including anti-Semitism. This is a 2 million contract that we fund annually. We work alongside other organisations, so it's an additional layer of support. Additionally, we'll have discussed here before the Mayor's Shared Endeavour Fund. This is crucial because the things that might not reach criminal thresholds, especially in young people's, it's really important that we go out and do that preventative work and talk to young people, especially about how we need to make sure that we're using critical thinking, being aware of our language and tackling extremist views. We've done this with tens of thousands of Londoners, especially including projects to counter anti-Semitism. The latest round of the Shared Endeavour Fund we launched in March and is a fund of £875,000 that we hope to reach 50,000 Londoners with, which will begin in September. I want to also add that MOPAC, as you know, has a long established relationship with the Community Security Trust and Shomrim, and we've been working since 2019 with CST to roll out training for all places of worship led by CST because of, sadly, the long established history the Jewish community have had in needing additional security. For example, I've always had security outside my synagogue. I have to say the recent reports of children not being able to go on school trips without a blazer on really brings home the impact that this is having on people's day-to-day lives, which is really why it's so important that we are working closely with community organisations. The latest round of training that CST have rolled out was on the 7th of May. But we will continue to work closely, as Matt has laid out, how we will be developing additional support, especially in Golders Green and Hackney, to make sure that we are working with the community. We've also worked really closely with Barnet Council. They've got an additional £500,000 to carry on with the interfaith work that they've been doing and have had a lot of success with. So this is about making sure that we have community partners alongside specialist teams with the police to make sure we're doing all we can to support primarily our Jewish community at the moment, but all Londoners.
Thank you both. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Deputy Mayor, and good morning, Deputy Commissioner. My question is to the Deputy Commissioner. Deputy Commissioner, what specific security and safety measures have been put in place to protect Jewish communities across London?
So over the period since the 23rd of March, we've deployed officers in highly visible roles, so patrolling in the areas of Jewish community populations around places of worship and during periods of particular focus, so during religious holidays and other periods of communal activity, in addition to hundreds. So, I mean, as I say, as we sit now, an additional 1,000 officer shifts over the immediate month afterwards. That was close to something like 15,000 officer shifts as we surged our activity into the areas most affected. But in addition to those, we've placed more taser-trained officers, and you've seen the realities of the deployment of taser in recent weeks, and we've increased the presence of armed policing patrols into the areas that are effective. We've used our specialisms as well to support all of that activity. So the teams who are involved typically in manhunt activity, so those who go after our most wanted, have gone after our most wanted in relation to hate crime and made arrests. And so, for example, in relation to one of the incidents that took place in the weekend's protest, that led to an arrest in Plymouth. Over the last period of days, we're using our specialist resources from across the Met to ensure that perpetrators of hate crimes are brought to justice, and those include, of course, our work with counter-terrorism policing to bring those to justice for the most serious offences.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I'm fortunate enough to have a large number of synagogues in my constituency, and I know that the presence at religious services has been really welcomed. My question around that, though, is that while some of the synagogues in my constituency have had that protection, some others haven't. So I'm just wondering how the decision is made over where to deploy officers into which synagogues in London.
So our aim is to make sure that through neighbourhood policing and through that enhanced presence, the experience of extra security, of the proximity of our officers, the sense of a relationship with our officers is felt everywhere. And I've been right across London having these conversations, not just in the northwest of London, but in East London, and at the edges of Essex, where you can feel a long way away from Stamford Hill and from Golders Green, and equally community members there deserve to feel protected. So we are clear that there are areas where, because of their public profile as centres of the Jewish community, and because of the incidents that have taken place, we need a particular focus, and because of the density of the population, of course, and that's led to 60% of the uplift we're focusing into Golders Green and about 40% into Stamford Hill. But we also want to make sure that we have good response across London to Jewish communities in South London and East London, and that everywhere people feel that sense of connection. So there isn't a sense, to answer your question, there isn't a sense in which we have deprioritised any areas. We are putting enhanced presence. As ever in policing London, as I'm sure those involved in all sorts of public services across London experience, achieving consistency across 32 boroughs is a challenge, an enduring challenge. And so we have been monitoring our presence in those communities, testing whether officers have been present. One of the things we know we've learned from this last period is there's a big difference between driving past in a car or a van and getting out and engaging people and talking. So actually it's possible that some of the places that haven't felt that presence have actually had officers patrolling. But because we've drawn officers from around the Met, not necessarily always familiar with the areas, they will potentially not have always stopped by, called in, had the conversation. So we've been giving direction to ensure those conversations do take place. And also it sits behind our decision to have a settled team in the areas of greatest concern, because you need to build relationships to do that well. And wherever we do that, for all faith communities, in fact, neighbourhood policing is the core of that relationship. So an extended answer, thank you for your question, Assembly Member, but we have not deprioritised. We know that there is a difference in how the encounters are experienced. And we're certainly encouraging officers to not just be on the street outside, but be present, feel the presence, and also to think about other times in communal life. So shopping on a Friday morning, which is part of communal life, not just being there on Friday night outside of synagogue, and to think about presence at places where people are actually at home during holidays rather than in synagogues. So we're very grateful to the Jewish Police Association and to colleagues of all ranks, including some senior Jewish police officers who helped inform that practice to be really, really focused on what can make the biggest impact and feel most present, to your point.
Yeah, thank you for that really detailed answer. I think a lot of people will welcome that. I'm trying to understand how the decision making is kind of taken. So is it quite centralised when it comes to, say, Stamford Hill and Golders Green, which I could completely understand, and then for boroughs, say, like mine, Westminster, is it the superintendent's given a bit more leeway to decide how they deploy their resources? Are the neighbourhood teams given that space to maybe make a decision over whether they're going to do a patrol round or whether they're going to go in and shake everyone's hand? How is it decided who does what?
We've been quite prescriptive during this period under the command of Gold Commander, so Commander James Conway, and through an operation which has set expectations for the presence in communities. It has particularly focused the most precise instruction and direction on that has focused on the areas of largest population and highest concern, and away from there, we do expect, as you described, borough superintendents and neighbourhood teams to take some responsibility for, and they do, for understanding their area and responding. But we are really clear we want to have consistency in the universal offer. So what should everybody expect? Should be consistent, and that's what we've been endeavouring to drive out. So a shorter answer to your question is, during this period, we have been relatively directive, even though our neighbourhood policing model is really based on people understanding their patch and responding to it. Part of the reason we've been very directive is we have surged officers, sometimes hundreds, in excess of 500 a day at points, into those areas from the rest of London. So we've had to be very clear about what the task was they were fulfilling.
Yeah, thank you. I think if it's just one potential recommendation is just because I think the synagogues obviously in close areas will speak to each other. I think there can be a feeling that if police are going to one synagogue and not another, you want that reassurance that they're going to come to your synagogue as well, and everyone's being treated kind of equally in that sense.
And thank you, Assembly Member. That feedback is always incredibly welcome. And as I say, I think we need to do some old-fashioned police work at points. So the visits in the night to synagogues like Kenton United Synagogue, the checking on doors and windows, the things that are pretty old school policing, really, they have made a contribution in this last period to community security. And so those questions about consistent presence, and we do know people within a community, even across London, and indeed, I should say as well, across the country, people swap notes on what their experiences have been, and we need to be as consistent as we can be, as well as recognising that the priority and resources always need to follow threat. But part of our job is to give people the confidence that they are being kept safe, and so that contact you've described is clear, and we certainly will still pursue the greatest consistency we can achieve.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner. And just finally, in terms of the recent attacks we've seen both in Manchester and in London, are lessons kind of being learned behind the scenes in how to potentially prevent future attacks or potential attacks in the future?
Yeah, so there are rigorous reviews after those incidents to learn lessons. I think the one thing I would just want to land on it, there's a lot in protective security to make sure we continue to reinforce and have partnership with the CST and others that can be most effective in protective security. And there is no doubt that the actions of volunteers and staff members of the CST have saved lives over the last period. And people sadly have also paid the ultimate price for their commitment to their community security as well. So there are always opportunities to think about whether protective security can be enhanced. But to points made by the chair and others, we cannot resolve the safety of the Jewish community by ever higher fences and ever higher walls. And so we will continue to learn what we can from our policing operations to be robust in pursuit of those who commit hate crimes, including these terrible anti-Semitic hate crimes, to work with a range of authorities, including the whole of government and its intelligence community, to disrupt the foreign actors who would drive this kind of division into our communities and exploit it. But part of the reason that can be exploited is there is a wider environment of anti-Semitism which exists. And the lesson away from the policing response, if I may go there just for a second, committee, is that a much wider whole of society response to anti-Semitism is required. That means online spaces, that means education, it means the health sector, it means the charitable sector. There are a whole set of other interventions which could make it harder for the level of anti-Semitism that exists more broadly to create a permissive environment, which on occasions definitely creates the conditions in which people carry out these terrible acts. So we will continue to learn our lessons. I was very heartened to be in number 10 for a comprehensive bringing together of those other sectors a few weeks ago, because we're really clear. It goes slightly to Assembly Member and the Deputy Chair's point about how we deal with other forms of behaviour. There are behaviours that need to be dealt with by the Charity Commission, by people in education sectors, by Ofcom. There are a whole set of other partners who can play a part in reducing this. And none of that, I should say, Assembly members, to step aside from the enormous responsibility we feel as London's police force to protect our communities here.
Definitely agree with all of that. Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, we do all agree with that. I hope you saw the letter that we actually sent regarding the attack in Golders Green on the 29th of April. This committee sent a letter with only one exception to thank the swift and decisive approach those officers took. They were so brave, trying to get a knife off somebody when they're clearly intent on doing damage. Is so brave of those officers, and we're very grateful. And I'm sure you'd agree with me that stating entirely false information about police on national media is not helpful. It's not helpful to anybody. It's not helpful to the situation. And it certainly doesn't help community relationships with the police. So I sincerely hope any senior politician wanting to do that thinks again. We'll go over now to Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Good morning, both. Yes, I was going to start on if you look kind of on the timeline of attacks that have just been upping and upping, obviously culminating in that awful stabbing in Golders Green. And again, to repeat our thanks, I think, as the majority of the committee, to those brave officers. And I really do regret people perhaps stating false information when running towards somebody that's, as Assembly Member Hall said, intent on stabbing people is not an easy thing to do. So I really am thankful for all they did on that day. Deputy Mayor, obviously, I think it's already been a theme throughout the meeting that security alone is not the answer. And you've touched on what more you want to do. This is something, by the way, as well, the Board of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Jewish Leadership Council said that security measures are essential, but they're not alone the answer. That's something you've repeated. And you've talked about perhaps a shared endeavour fund. Did you want to say more about the specific programmes within that are targeted at tackling anti-Semitism?
We have several programmes under the Shared Endeavour Fund that talk about anti-Semitism. We work with organisations like the Anne Frank Trust and others to have critical conversations within the community. And I would say even the programmes that I've seen, like the Future Leaders programme, which primarily look at extremist views on different areas, make young people challenge the things that they see on social media, make them ensure that they are thinking critically about what they're doing. And we obviously annually evaluate the work of the Shared Endeavour Fund, and we've had United Nations evaluation on that fund, independent of us, to say that it is making a difference, especially in the thinking of young people.
Could you, which programmes specifically are targeted at reducing anti-Semitism? Because I suppose they have KPIs attached to them as well.
I can get you a full list of the programmes, but I know primarily we've worked with Solutions Not Sides, the Anne Frank Trust, as I said, Future Leaders, Active Bystanders, a number.
Are those specifically targeted at tackling anti-Semitism?
Yes, some of them are, yeah.
Those programmes within that are so Active Bystander programme, for example, that's specifically the entire
about standing up to all forms of hate crime. But the work we do, particularly with the Anne Frank Trust, is...
Yeah, the Anne Frank Trust, I'd imagine that would be specifically targeted. Is that the only programme that's specifically targeted?
No, there's a number. I can get you, as I said, I can get you a full list, but I know that there is a number. And through the this round, the 7th round, we've obviously reflected on the current circumstances and have asked for additional programmes to come forward in that vein.
You don't have a number, though, of programmes that you... No,
not in front of
me. And perhaps a number of the... in terms of money from the grant. Do you have a number?
The overall...
No, sorry, not the overall of the specific targeted program.
No, I know that we've had over 10,000 people in London engaged in work on anti-Semitism, but I'm happy to give a full breakdown.
Was that, and in work on anti-Semitism, was that through the Anne Frank programme, or?
No, that would have been across the programmes in that space. I'll
so how are you measuring that?
Through the evaluations that we do annually.
But you're saying these programmes are about tackling everything, so I'm just wondering how you've understood it that 10,000 people have received some sort of training, guidance on anti-Semitism.
So we obviously monitor the programmes in which we fund, and we track how many people they're reaching out to and where the specific areas of concern they're covering, and that evaluation is done. So that's how we know how many people. And then we also make sure that in the evaluation of that programme, we have things like before and after surveys to talk to young people. But
you don't know which programmes here today?
No, I don't have a list of the programmes, but as I said, I'm very happy to send that to you.
And in terms of the Loved and Wanted campaign, obviously that's do you know which funding from that is being specifically targeted to help Jewish communities?
The Loved and Wanted campaign, moreover, is working to ensure that all Londoners are able to celebrate the diversity of London, and making sure that especially organisations in the migration space, but all forms of hate crime are being supported.
Yeah, so could you tell me which
I know
are
that,
specific?
At the moment, the Loved and Wanted campaign are particularly working with the Jewish community. As you probably know, it's the celebration month of Jewish culture at the moment, so they are doing that work.
So in terms of the funding of spaces, which a lot of the funding from Loved and Wanted has gone into these community spaces.
No, I don't have that, but I'm happy to share the work we've been doing on
my
that.
Understanding
because
is
I
that,
think
my
it's
understanding
really...
is it's a no when you look at the Loved and Wanted spaces, but I could be wrong, so that's why I'd like you to...
I'll happily clarify that.
It would be good. I think it would be when we're coming to this meeting to talk about how we tackle anti-Semitism in London. And one of the key things that both you and Matt are saying today is that it's not the policing alone; it's the additional educational programmes. Again, I just think it would be better to come to these meetings more fully prepared on what it is as the exact offer.
As I said, I'm always happy to provide additional information to the committee. I understand why you'd want that information. I'm proud of the work that we've been doing outside of policing to support that civil society. You'll know that the Mayor has convened a meeting of political leaders. I've met with
I've asked you specifically about a couple of campaigns and you don't have that information, and this would be the perfect place to discuss that in more detail. But the thing I wanted to go on...
The committee has had previous sessions on the Shared Endeavour Fund. I understood that we were talking Moreover today, but as I've said
But
repeatedly,
you're
I'm
the
very
person that has
happy
mentioned the
to-
Shared
I'm
Endeavour
very
Fund as
happy-
something that's important to tackling the issue. I didn't
Yes,
even
it
mention
is.
it. You said it was important to tackling it. So if you believed it's important to tackling it, surely you'd have the information on it. But anyway, so we'll move on to the new community protection team. I wondered, could you tell us a little bit more about the skill set that's being used to recruit officers to that role and the indicators for success?
Yeah, thank you very much. So we're going to recruit officers principally to undertake an enhanced neighbourhood policing function. Some will already bring, and we are keen that there is present cultural competence, that people have experience of Jewish communal life, and that amongst the officers we recruit, those who've got lived experience of anti-Semitism form part of that. But we will train and educate and support officers who don't have that background and experience. Similarly, we're keen to use the skills we've developed through wider counter-terrorism work to identify hostile reconnaissance and detect and disrupt terrorist planning and the planning of egregious hate crimes. So those skills will either form part of what officers bring to the task or what they are trained in. We intend in our initial build of capabilities to have more than 10, probably in the region of 20 detectives working on hate crime investigations. So those will be individuals who can bring enhanced investigative skills, including some greater provision at the centre of the Met to monitor the way it goes, if I may, to Assembly Member Small Edwards' question about making sure we're consistent across London, as well as having a team of detectives who are focused on those areas of greatest concern. We want to make sure that hate crimes are investigated effectively across London. So those skills will be important. We have, it's worth saying, indicated to government that to do this work well, that 100 officers would ideally be more like 300, and that would allow us to undertake and commit to the enhanced armed policing presence. In addition, in particular, at the moment, we are continuing to flex
I'm really
that
sorry,
resource.
I just didn't understand. When you said 100 would be more like 300, he's saying that those 100 will do the work of 300, or
No,
you're saying
we
you
would like it
prefer-
to
you
be
prefer
300.
Okay, all right.
So
please.
we at the moment, we have some in-year funding, which allows us to meet the costs of the current operations to some extent. I mean, in truth, we are going to rapidly exceed the costs of even the operations as they stand with the funding that's been made available. It's insufficient to meet the costs of what we will have undertaken during this year, and we have no certainty of that funding for the year ahead. But at risk, we are going to proceed whilst the conversation with government continues, and we see the funding which allows for a capacity of 100 to be built to be a very important stepping stone. But we think that to do this work well, consistently across London, but focused on the areas of greatest concern, we would put the number of officers required, and a mixture of officers and staff, but the number of people required in the region of 300.
Thank you. I'm really concerned at the moment that we're about to lose 60 PCSOs with a great deal of experience from who were also managing the TfL red routes, and they're about to be made redundant. Cross purposes here, it looks like there are vacancies within the Met. Could you commit to looking at those 60 PCOs that are due to lose their job on the 25th of May and seeing if there's roles like this they could be redeployed to?
Thank you. I mean, we are, to say very briefly, if I may, we're very actively engaged and concerned with the futures of 60 people who have been our colleagues. This relates, as you'll know, to activity that was contracted to be delivered by the Met, by TfL, which is now going to be delivered by a third party. And the consequence of that is a transfer under protected employment rights, 2P, for those individuals. But we do know that a number would prefer to remain with the Met, and there are opportunities within the Met for which they can apply, and we are supporting those colleagues to bring to them the opportunities that exist, to help make them aware of the opportunities that exist, and to support them in applying for those. But since this is very live and relates to the real lives of 60 people, which we're involved in active conversations around, I won't say much more about it. We are not in a, to be really precise, Assemblymember Best, we are not in a redeployment situation. We are in a transfer, a 2P situation. But we do want to make sure those colleagues who want to can see the opportunities that are available in the Met, can apply for them, and if they have the skills, can be recruited to them.
Thanks. I just, without getting too into the grass of this, I do want to make clear that the problem is they're not going to be 2P'd either. They're going to cease to be employed on the 25th of May.
Yeah,
which is
we believe they should be transferred
yes,
under those
I know the
protected
Met
rights.
thinks that, but they will cease to be employed on the 25th of May. And so it's even more important that they come in to the Met back and give us their experience. And just finally, I wanted to go back to that timeline of aggression and crime that we've seen against the Jewish community. Deputy Mayor, in order to tackle this as well as education, it's clearly important we recognise where it's coming from. Has there been a conversation around where the main violence is coming from in terms of perpetrators and what is motivating them?
Well, as previously said, the way we look at that from a partnership perspective is through the contest board, which I chair. We have regular updates on the nature of the threat to all Londoners, but especially the anti-Semitic threat that we understand at the moment. So yes, we get regular updates through that.
Yes, so where is the motivation of those perpetrators that we've seen who've caused these violent crimes in the last month or so?
As the Commissioner has outlined, some of this is in relation to hostile state threats, some of it is in relation to homegrown extremists, for the lack of a better term, and some of it, as we know, on the less extreme scale, is hate crimes that we're seeing moreover.
Would you be willing, Deputy Mayor, to call it out and call those people out that are doing that? I mean, I think when it comes to, say, far right hatred and far right racism, the Mayor's been very quick to call that out. Would you look at calling out this for what it is?
I would call out anti-Semitism in all its forms, as I've said.
But where it's coming from,
Best.
like
Sorry,
you say, where it's coming from, the motivation to give that hate.
Assemblymember Best, sorry?
The motivation of that hate. Will you be, as opposed to, like I say, the Mayor and yourself have called out far right, would you be willing to call out the motivation for this hatred?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, but I would call out repeatedly and speak strongly against all forms of hatred, but in this context, definitely anti-Semitism.
I think you do understand. I don't think you want to answer the question.
Deputy Commissioner, did you want to come in?
I only wanted to briefly say a couple of things, if I can, in relation to hate crimes, in case we move on before we've covered this ground. I will briefly touch on Assemblymember's Best question as well. To acknowledge, and the Deputy Chair has asked about our treatment of hate crime as distinct from what were categorised as non-crime hate incidents. I just want to put that into context in terms of a number. So in the last 6 months, we recorded 10,347 hate crime offences in the Met. And we have reached a positive outcome, so charges or other criminal justice or related interventions in just short of 2,000 of those cases. Now that doubles what we had achieved previously. So we're focusing our effort and getting better outcomes for the victims of those hate crimes. But I did just want to scale the challenge of those things which we are recording as hate crimes and recognise that our threshold for that brings a very large number of offences into view. Then to Assemblymember Best's point, I don't want to get ahead of where the investigations are today in relation to the arsons in particular. But but I do want to acknowledge that for our Jewish communities, the reality that we seek to support them through is there is hostility from what is characterised as far right or extreme right-wing sentiment. There is hostility from so-called Islamist sources, and there is the hostile state intentions, particularly those of the Iranian regime. So there will, in the experience we have seen over the last period, be a combination of those three realities, and it is for that reason we're so determined and so clear that although all communities deserve protection from hate crime, there is a specific moment in time now, and it seems that it will be with us for a period, where the Jewish community is at the centre of that overlapping circle of hatred.
Yep. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. The sad thing is it's always the Jewish community, and that in itself is heartbreaking. Very, very quick point. You said 10,000 hate crimes a month. Have we removed most of the ridiculous stuff that we log as tweets or whatever? Are we now just going for the real stuff as opposed to hurty words on social media?
So we can cover it. We can cover in more detail and specificity
We'll do it another time.
which comes back on non-crime hate incidents. The thing which we should be really clear about is there is a nexus between offline offending and online behaviour. So we know that, and I won't speak to the cases recently. There has been online recruitment and incitement of people to carry out violent acts. So we're not ignoring the online space, but we are focusing on those things online which are likely to incite or bring about violence,
Okay.
or create fear in a very direct sense that they absolutely constitute offences. And we can certainly bring forward, or I mean, it might be an instance where we can write, at least in sharing a policy, the approach to be taken in relation to non-crime hate incidents.
Okay, we won't go down that one further because we've got so much more on this. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you and good morning. Deputy Commissioner, could I ask, given the issues which we've had recently, which have been quite well aired in terms of behaviour from certain officers, has there been enhanced vetting of members of the Community Police Task Force?
We are now in a position where updated vetting is taking place in a way which had been less complete than it should have been in the past. So all officers, the endeavour is to get every officer in current vetting. We'll test the behaviours and attitudes of people as they're recruited into roles. We understand and know there will be strong levels of motivation to protect communities in that. So we would expect people are very motivated. We're going to speak later about the application of technology to the question of professional standards and culture, but that is giving us new insights into the attitudes of colleagues, and particularly helping us identify problematic attitudes. So there will probably be, there may be over time some roles which require higher formal levels of vetting, but you know, we are expecting that all officers in the Met are subject to scrutiny through the regular cycle of vetting, and that vetting is increasingly informed by data which is being drawn from a wider set of sources.
Yeah, but given the specific sensitive nature of this particular deployment of 100 officers at the moment, would you not expect that, given that sensitive nature and given the issues and the histories which have been played out quite openly over the last year, for there to be some sort of enhanced vetting just to make sure that nobody's getting through that shouldn't have been getting through, given the...
I mean, to be clear, if there's anybody not suitable for those roles, not capable of protecting a community without fear or favour, they shouldn't be in the Met.
No, I agree,
Yeah.
but there we are. I would hope that if it's not being done, that it may be a suggestion to take forward. Now we're getting the new 100 officers. How are you filling the gaps left by the redeployment of officers to the community policing team? Community protection team, sorry.
So at the moment, we're an organisation that is shrinking. Our principal lever to control our number of officers in particular is recruitment. And so the importance of getting certainty about future funding on how we deliver the task you just articulated is critical. Because unless we've got certainty about longer term funding, we can't dial up our recruitment to take account of potentially, I hope, having 300 additional officers to do this work. And we continue to talk to government about the importance of that. In reality, today, we are taking people out on a relatively ad hoc basis from communities across London to provide this presence. And we believe it will be more efficient and effective to reduce that abstraction by dedicating resource. It will improve the relationships, as has been touched on, with communities and with places of worship. And at the same time as we are reducing our numbers, as I say, we do get some choices about some controls. So we are thinking hard about the point at which we can start to recruit to take account of this. Now, you will know that recruitment, we can bring forward people already in the recruitment pipeline, but it is some period of time before they're effective officers out on the street. So we're at present, I don't want to mislead anyone on this committee at all. We're moving around the same number of officers. Just to be clear, you know, for the time being, we are as rapidly as we can trying to reflect the 100 in our recruitment profile at risk, and think about how we would dial up recruitment to bring 300 people, a larger workforce into. But you know, at present, we are moving people around the Met to meet these needs. But, you know, in the candor required of this committee, we're doing that at the moment anyway by disrupting people's professional lives, and very extensively, I should commend my colleagues, their home lives as well, by the kind of duties they've had to fulfil. Thank you,
One
Assembly.
question to the Deputy Mayor, if I may.
Yeah, you can, as long as it's not treading on the toes of the next two questions, which you're in danger of doing.
I've got 6.
Sorry?
I've got the
And
one
I've
on
got
funding.
5, which is before you.
Let me have a quick
So
look at what
take
this
note.
says. Give me a second. No, it's nothing about
Go on
that.
then.
It's a quick question for the Deputy Mayor. Given that we are looking at redeployment of 100 officers, moving people around, and we're going to need another, to get up to 300, we're going to have to go to a recruitment process. Would it not be a good idea for the Mayor to step in at the last minute and save the jobs of the 60 PCSOs that Assembly Member Best has just mentioned, given that we need those officers in the Met, not working for an outsourced, stupid traffic enforcement private unit? We need those officers here. The Mayor can step in. He's the chair of TfL. He's in charge of TfL. He's the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. He could step in, and he could find the money to do it. He could step in, put a pause on that process until we know that those officers are not needed. Will you make a commitment today to take that suggestion back to the Mayor and step in to save those jobs until we are absolutely sure they are not needed in the current circumstances?
Assembly Member Roberts, the Deputy Commissioner has outlined the conversations that are very live at the moment in regard to, you know, these PCSOs that we want to support. I'm very conscious that we're talking about people's livelihoods here. I want to assure the committee that both the Mayor, myself and Seb Dance, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, have been having repeated conversations with all partners to try and make sure that this situation is resolved. You've heard from the Deputy Commissioner that we don't want a situation where these people are, you know, in a state of not knowing what's happening with their work. You've heard from the Deputy Commissioner how they're looking at other roles. We are fully in support of making sure that through the negotiation that we discussed last time at this committee, understanding the changes in the relationship between TfL and the Metropolitan Police, that we find a solution that helps this overall issue.
Okay, just to reiterate, we are 5 days away from these people being moved out of the Met, from these offices, often long-serving officers. The discussions that we had at the last committee were before the current outbreak of anti-Semitism and violence in communities. Times have changed. Things have moved on. There is a need now for the Mayor to step in, even if only for a 3-month extension, I would suggest, so that we can take stock, find out if we can deploy these officers, because we are also redeploying officers from other communities, let's not forget. We're redeploying 100, this is 60. This is something that could be done, and you have power to act. I will leave it there. Thank you.
I want to, first of all, assure the committee that we have been working to support the Metropolitan Police Service in their proposals to government for the additional money to make sure that they have sustainable money. The Deputy Commissioner has outlined a 3-year project that would enable 300 more officers. We've been working with them on that proposal, and we're actively trying to encourage government to make sure that we can have that sustainable funding over this period. The Deputy Commissioner and obviously the Commissioner have operational independence on where officers are deployed, but I know that that is something that is being looked at.
Thank you. Assembly Member Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, panel. So I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things that have been discussed so far. Firstly, as with the Chair, I want to put on record my strong thanks and support for the way those brave officers intervened in that horrific incident, stabbing incident in Golders Green, and putting their lives at risk to save others is something that your officers do every single day and needs the full backing of us as politicians. I think it's not helpful when a leader of a national party, who also happens to be a member of the Assembly, isn't able to do that, and indeed tweets misinformation about the perpetrator already supposedly have been handcuffed. But I'm sure you'd agree that that's not helpful for anyone. But moving on, so often when these issues are discussed, we kind of face this challenge of equivalence and talking about all forms of hate without actually recognising that at this particular point in time, anti-Semitism is a bigger threat and is being seen on a much bigger scale than any other form of hatred in our capital city at the moment. And to confirm that, the Commissioner's letter to the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee recognises this is in the face of a level of threat and hate crime far greater than that faced by other communities. And I think it's important that we recognise that, and hopefully both of you on the panel can confirm that's indeed the case. When Assemblymember Best was trying to ask the Deputy Mayor for your understanding of the source of this particular problem, this particular hatred, you were very hesitant and squeamish to actually call it out. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, for mentioning that a large part of this comes from Islamist ideology. And I don't know why, Deputy Mayor, you were a bit squeamish in not calling that out. But if I could also just quote from a tweet from the campaign against anti-Semitism after this weekend's events, where they said, "We are also aware of displays of some anti-Semitic messaging on the Unite the Kingdom march. It was absolutely dwarfed by the anti-Jewish hatred engulfing the much smaller hate march organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign." So can we all at least acknowledge that this particular point in time, this particular level of hatred, it's much more prevalent from Islamist and far left than it is from any kind of supposed far right?
I'm absolutely not squeamish in calling out anti-Semitism in all its form. I want to be very clear on that. As someone, as you know, who's the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, as someone who has lived proudly as a Jewish member of her community all her life, I don't see why I would be squeamish about calling out anti-Semitism. I said previously that the issue has been heightened by global events. We all know, we've seen the data, that anti-Semitism has increased since October the 7th. I also want to be very clear that the Mayor has repeatedly stood by the Jewish community, and he has also made sure to repeat that whilst protest in all its forms is the cornerstone of our democracy, that we should give due regard to the impact it is having on communities, and the language that is used is important. The Deputy Commissioner talked about the work that was done in the last and previous marches to condition marches, giving regard to community impact, but also especially looking at for both marches, is my understanding, but maybe the Deputy Commissioner can add more, to look at the use of religious and racial hatred language and making sure that action and arrests were taken on the back of that. I want to be clear that we do stand against hate in all its form, but I don't think any of us are saying, given what the community has been going through over the last few months, that we don't recognise what's happening for the Jewish community at the moment. We have done, over the last 4 months, we've worked tirelessly with the Jewish community and the protected security services to make sure that there is the resource and work going both in enforcement and community work to support the Jewish community, and I'm very proud of that work.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can I deal with one thing that's come up a couple of times, just so I'm very happy to hear it said again, to be frank, but just to acknowledge, I regret that not everybody feels they could support officers who step forward to place their safety at risk to protect communities. I have no regret for the fact policing carries extraordinary powers and therefore an extraordinary expectation of accountability. And there are accountability mechanisms when force is used, and those have been activated in the case in point and have followed their path, and they are still, it's still in progress. But, we should be very clear. Policing requires courage. It's messy. It's a contact sport, and it is not best judged from the traffic of viral videos. It is better scrutinised through the mechanisms for accountability that exist. That is the mature and indeed democratic way to carry out the scrutiny of policing. And if I may just say, in addition to the physical courage of officers, I just wanted to acknowledge the moral courage of officers to get up every day and do their work. At the weekend, 6 officers were subject to racial hatred during the marches that took place, that we know of, and 4 assaulted. And so we know that our officers from minority backgrounds, minoritized backgrounds, are repeatedly facing hostility from several sides, just to be clear, since we're in the business of talking about equivalence, from several sides are facing hostility when they go out to police the communities they've pledged to protect. So we welcome support. We thank the committee for their acknowledgement of the courage of the officers in relation to those attempted murder incidents. And, we will continue to expose ourselves and expect our officers to be exposed to accountability through the right and proper channels. I just wanted to acknowledge that so that we can recognise that. In terms of the distinction between anti-Semitism and other forms of hate, can I just sort of read into the record the figures as we have them at the moment? So at present, we would say the rate of anti-Jewish offences against the Jewish population is 7 times higher than compared to an intolerable level, but a present level of anti-Muslim hate crime. And it is that equivalence which I'm calling it out because it's that equivalence we're being challenged to respond to on occasions. And we need to be strong, effective, robust, diligent. All of those things need to apply to anti-Muslim hate crime. And we're determined that they should. So I am not diminishing the number, the second number, and indeed that second number reflects a very large part of our communities very affected by the reality of those hate crimes. What we have is a very concentrated, 7 times concentrated effect on the Jewish community, which is leading to a different policing response. But I do want to be clear, I don't find the discussion about equivalence on occasions always very helpful to us. We need to respond to communities and to people according to their need rather than compete one community against another for its protection. I think that is an unhealthy way to pursue the question. Can I just go to the point about, and we might pivot a bit more to protests at some point, Chair, but there are what have been treated as political statements in the past that, due to their cumulative effect, and actually when you get underneath them, their impact, that we will be less tolerant of now in terms of our policing of those protests. So we have seen a lot of, I want to be very explicit, we've seen a lot of coding of the phrase Zionist and other, I won't get into the other forms of that, but it's used in a range of ways for Jewish. And so one of the arrests we made at the weekend was in relation to someone holding a placard professing that all Zionists should be hanged effectively. And we've taken robust action against that. So there is a political commentary. We can bring back numbers. It is quite hard. I should say in relation to the most recent, most egregious incidents, it is hard to know at the moment what the motivation of the individuals were. And if I could take it one degree away to what we've seen, the Russian state and the Wagner group engender in London, they have taken people who had no allegiance to a cause and paid them sums of money to carry out acts. So those are possibilities as well. But we know that there is a real anti-Semitism at the core of much of the behaviour we've talked about, as well as there is homophobic hate crime and anti-Muslim hate crime, sadly being experienced by our communities. I would wish, and we will intend, not to trade one community's safety with another.
Thank you.
I do have a question later on about protests. I'll come back to that then. Thank you.
Right, okay, you brought protests in, so that's confused matters somewhat, because we're still, no, I've got people waiting to speak still on number 4. So Assembly Member Duval, you wanted to come in a while ago.
Thank you very much. And very quickly, Chair, I just want to, I wasn't going to, but I just quickly want to pick up the issues that Assembly Member Roberts raised, because increasingly us on this side just find it doesn't matter about the challenges we're facing now. If the process is wrong, you need to think again and bring yourself back into line for a proper process and deliberations about those officers. It is not right what you're doing. And I'm looking at the MPS on that. It's a mess. It can't be 5 days to go and that 60 members of our staff in the MPS don't know where their future is and what there is. I'll tell you where the future is. It's in the courts. It should never be in that way, because actually I think it's wrong. It's wrong not what you're trying to do. That's a matter for you and the MPS to do. But it is wrong about the way that it's come about. And no members of staff should be placed in that set of circumstances. I hope the Mayor does intervene very quickly to bring back some common sense to a very difficult situation. Now, the points I wanted to make, and I was very interested to hear the comments that you made about the Circle of 8, and there shouldn't be any hierarchies, and we have had evidence in the past of where the police have responded to various communities that are under sustained attack from wherever and done the appropriate level of response. And I think you have told us about the evidence today that says it's justified in the actions that we're taking in terms of the respect of the challenges that you're facing at this moment in time. The two points that I want to make in terms of the Circle of 8. We talked about non-hate crime, hate crime, criminal hate crime. But actually, I would just want to concentrate on hate crime meets terrorism. And I just want to be reassured that we are walking the extra mile, because I think in the past in policing, we find the evidence that says X, and then we stop, and we don't go on and find. And I'll give you an example of that. So the drug dealer caught in possession, some of us don't believe that it should be caught in possession, but the ones that are caught in possession breaking the law, we don't then ask the extra question, well, why are they there and what's the other criminality going on? Because we've got the result and we take them off the streets. The murder that happens, but is there a drug-related issue around it? So the issue of a hate crime that takes place, but is there something a little bit more wider? Your comments suggested some of those issues. And I think on the terrorism issue is one that I just want to be reassured that we are clear in terms of some of the investigations we're carrying out, that we don't lose sight of some of the wider issues. The issues that you said that's been going on in terms of this sustained attack on the Jewish community, not just here in London, but across our country, around that. Secondly, just to give you, it's not a new tool in the armoury of terrorists and haters, arson. Do we now, without giving the game away to the other side, need to think carefully about how we investigate arson, from the amateurish approaches to the much more sophisticated approaches in terms of what the Jewish community faces and also other actors? It's really that element of criminals meet state actors for the very issues that you alluded to earlier on. What's our thinking about it? But also I would put in a plea. It's putting pressure, I would imagine, looking at some of the cases that are in public, a lot of pressure on our fire services around investigations. And we know that they're equally under pressure for their financial issues as well. So can you just give us an insight about where agencies are coming together and sharing information about, it's not a new crime, but this particular sustained attack that we're facing on in terms of terrorism?
Yeah, thank you very much, Member Lord Duval. Can I very quickly just revisit the PCSO point on 2 points, if I may? One is a technical point, the other is much more human. The technical point is that we have community support officers who are not constables. We have officers who are constables. Our choices about how we can redeploy people are absolutely shaped by that distinction. And I gave a description of the role requirements of the team we're building, and those fall at this point rather more heavily towards having constables, police officers carrying them out. I wanted to register that as a technical point. As a human point, if I may, I spent last night, this morning, trying to get us, for the sake of those people, to the best place we can. I really, it's an awful position for us to be in, and of course, most importantly, it's an awful position for them to be in, to have that sense of uncertainty. We believe that, having stepped away from a commitment to red route enforcement, that is going to be delivered through TfL to a contracted third party, and we think that requires 2P to take place. But we want those people who have been our colleagues to be treated fairly and well in that process, and that has occupied me greatly, even in the last 24 hours. So your points about the human impact are registered. Can I take sort of, I think, two principal questions? How far do we go to investigate these crimes? We should be really clear that bringing in counter-terrorism policing without getting into the individual investigations means we have access to the partnership with the UK intelligence community, digital forensics, that we're carrying out searches of home addresses, a number of the arrests. I mean, just give you a sense of it, I talked about 35 arrests in relation to the 11 incidents. And if I just, for absolute precision, say that there have been 9 arrests for a suspected conspiracy to commit arson at an unspecified location. So we're also getting into that area, which is the conspiracies to carry out, not just reacting to the events afterwards. We're going after the question, my colleagues in CT policing are going after the question of state involvement or terrorist organisation involvement to pursue that. We'll find it or not find it. We'll deliver that to the courts. And the consequences will be really severe for anybody, under the National Security Act or terrorism legislation or terrorist-weighted sentences. People will really feel the cost of that. And for what might be hundreds of pounds offered up to carry out these acts, they'll be looking at the back of a prison door for, many, many years. And I'm not saying that as some loose threat. There are people now going through the criminal justice system already as a consequence of that. So we must go further and further. As we deal, there's a question, it goes to the skills question that was asked as well, and capacity question. As we continue to improve at the centre our oversight of hate crime investigation, which we know is something we can lift the consistency of hate crime investigation, how far we can bring digital forensics, online investigation, all of those things, those questions is also important, because we want to connect the dots and really spot the risk of people who are emerging and escalating in their offending, using things like the PREVENT programme as well, of course, but using the wider counter-terrorism policing resource. We're in the middle of a conversation about police reform nationally at the moment, and one thing and the reason I mention that is one thing that's been really extraordinary in the last couple of months is you can talk this experience from the level of neighbourhood officers in Golders Green, frontline patrolling officers responding to incidents, to counter-terrorism detectives, to our partnership with MI5. Every bit of that has been connected in these operations through a golden thread. And whatever we do with police structures in the future, there must be that golden thread so that we can, Policing London, tap into all of that and get the benefits for protecting communities. We're very serious about it. Thank you for your question. On arson, so fire as a weapon. I mean, what we've seen over the last years is a move away from sophisticated terrorist methodologies. Some are still present, but if you look at the history of recent attacks, it's vehicles used as weapons, knives, and we've seen across Europe these incidents of fire used as a weapon. So it does present, and the question was asked about lessons learned, it presents the question about how to build defensive security, which is effective against that, and how also to build investigation capabilities that can respond to it. We need to be vigilant to the possibility we may not have identified all of those fires as potential issues. So I mentioned earlier one which was Wagner Group related. You know, it was a great local officer who said, this warehouse is involved in shipping things to Ukraine. Now, I mean, you can imagine that sounds very obvious when we make that observation now, but warehouse fires happen, don't they? And so, you know, we need to be very vigilant at the front end to identifying incidents that may bring about concern. I wanted to commend actually colleagues in the LFB for the joint work on all of these incidents. Their response has been swift. It has delivered public safety. And to your point about how we're coming together, on the morning after the attack on the Hatzler ambulances, I was there at the crime scene. The Deputy Mayor, I think, had been there during the course of the day. And the response on the night was extraordinary, not just by the blue light responders, but by the community volunteers engaged. And if you have seen pictures, you'll have seen pictures of the scene. You have a synagogue, a car park, and then a block of flats. The windows on the block of flats had been, many of them had been smashed by the explosion of the gases that were in the ambulances. And had people not been removed at speed, I think genuinely lives had been put at risk in that block of flats. So as well as the volunteers from Hatzler, other communal volunteers, LFB did a remarkable job there to deal with a really difficult fire. And as I arrived, you know, and I think one of the things we can say is that connection for policing, you know, that goes all the way through is true for LFB as well. There were very senior LFB members on the ground. We were together talking through the response to that incident. So I feel confident that in response, we're strong, and we need to keep working on the question of how we investigate fire as a weapon, make sure we identify all of those possibilities when they take place. We've had other fires in the area since that we've had to discount, because there will be other fires as well. But to your point about going that one notch further, I think sits behind both of your questions, if I may, is do we go one notch further? That's absolutely what we're committed to doing, because we want to give people confidence that those who carry out these acts will be brought to justice. We can do a whole range of other things, but we are the police, and that is definitely something we should deliver for communities.
Thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you.
Just on the matter,
Very quickly,
it's a matter for us as a committee. The golden thread that the Deputy Commissioner mentioned, we need to find some space of where we talk about potential reforms that London doesn't lose out in those reforms. If we could look at that, it would be very good.
Okay, fine, thank you. Last question on this, and we're still on question 4, colleagues. Welcome, Assembly Member Hamdash, to the committee. If you'd like to put your question now.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just in one of the last answers, you mentioned the PREVENT programme, which has been a central response to dealing with extremism. Now, unfortunately, we've had a number of high-profile incidences where these awful criminals have been known to the PREVENT programme and then have gone on to commit atrocities. Do you have a sense of whether reforms or changes are needed to prevent, to re-inspire trust in the programme?
Yeah, thank you very much, and welcome to the committee, Assembly Member. So I think, and I'm on record, have talked to government and others about the need to continue to evolve the PREVENT programme. It was built for a particular period where there was a model of radicalisation that took people with an interest, whether that was political or distortedly religious, and moved them through extremism to violent extremism to terrorism. That ladder of radicalisation has really been reversed. We've now got a significant number of young people, not exclusively boys, but many boys, who are exposed to violence, to the idea and notion of violence that becomes fixating for them, and then are searching for motivations, justifications, and a framing for that with all sorts of ideology. So people who will look at, in one internet search, look at neo-Nazi material, and another look at Islamist extremist material. PREVENT was built originally effectively to deal with radicalisation. First, that Islamist extremist radicalisation and a developing response to far-right extremism, and to support individuals and work with individuals to reduce that risk. The kind of interventions which were put in place are not the ones which will respond to the violence-fixated individuals that we're seeing now. The challenge for the PREVENT programme and for the wider system is that this is an and problem, not an or problem. We are still seeing, of course, committed, zealous, idealistic, or ideologically motivated, I should say, terrorist radicalisation. But what we do have, sadly, is a toxic online environment, which is leading to the connection and radicalisation of young people, in particular, to a range of ideologies or none. So I welcome the recommendations of the independent review on PREVENT that's been carried out, the appointment of a new independent commissioner on PREVENT, someone policing knows well and knows thoughtful about these issues. And I suppose if I can just link back to a point I made in relation to an earlier question, PREVENT is part of the preventative response to these questions. But there is a fundamental question about how on earth these young people can access this material online and connect online in the ways that they can. And so we can continue, PREVENT is hopefully catching people, identifying people before they are close to violence. Quite a lot of counter-terrorism policing is what we've talked about as sort of goal line defence. It really is, if people have got to that stage, quite a lot has happened in their lives. It's happening quicker because of online radicalisation, and so we do need to see the responsibility of big tech companies fill some of that gap which has been created, and we need our regulators to do really well in that space as well. So a shorter answer, Assembly Member, would have been to say a lot of change is required. We should also recognise that, I think in the last year about 10,000 referrals into PREVENT. So if you add that, and about 7,000 typically in the years before the Southport attacks. So if you add all of those up over the lifetime of PREVENT, there are a lot of people who have touched PREVENT, and it would be surprising if some of them didn't present enduring risk despite the interventions. We want that number to be zero, of course, but it would be surprising if it was, and we had a wholly effective response. But 10,000 people referred in the last year. We should also acknowledge the success of PREVENT where that has happened, and it's happened in many instances to de-escalate and manage risk and to refer to services. The final thing I'll say on this, if I may, is those services into which we would seek to refer to people are creaking and under enormous strain. So child and adolescent mental health services, services for neurodivergence, they are all under enormous pressure. And so Prevent might be a gateway, but what it had previously done in terms of de-radicalisation often now needs to be supported by those other services, which are often poorly placed to meet that need. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. We're on question 5 now, colleagues. This new community policing hub in Barnet, so where will it actually be situated, and when will it be there as something that we can look at?
Well, we have a neighbourhood base in Golders Green already, so we'll start. It's there, but we are actively pursuing a new premises. We've had a couple of options which we're working through. We've identified a chief inspector who will lead the core of the response. The people are built. We're building the teams now. So the reality is, in its temporary form, it is already present. What we're going to be doing over the next couple of months is rotating out those people who are temporarily in the area to have substantially people posted. But that is a question of weeks rather than months and months.
Okay, how much money have you been given to do that?
So we've got a fund which is £18 million from government. It deals with both the history of responding over the last period to the events, and we have spent millions during the last 6 or 7 weeks alone. But the answer is 18 million. Chair,
and
for
it
precision.
won't last 5 minutes. It really won't. And if it's not going into your core budget, all you're doing, and my sympathy, by the way, is with you, all you are doing are pinching more and more officers from anywhere you can find them, which is what you've been doing to try and fill up the safer neighbourhood teams as well. It just is unsustainable, Deputy Mayor. It's unsustainable. The police budget has got to be increased. You put £1 million into Loved and Wanted. I'd love and want some more police officers on our streets, please. I know £1 million is a drop in the ocean, but if you look at the amount of places that the Mayor sticks bits of money, it's absolutely fundamental we get more money into the police service.
Chair, I want to reiterate that we are fully supportive. We've been talking actively with government in them having more sustainable funding for this project. We know, moreover, as we've discussed many times in this committee, that we've been actively talking as well to government about the importance of making sure we have an uplift in funding. Moreover, especially recognising us as a capital city, and we have seen an uplift from government over the last 2 years, but we continue to lobby because we fully agree that what is needed is sustainable long-term funding for the Metropolitan Police Service.
It's words at the moment. We actually need money in there. We're losing police officers. We're not being able to get them back. And talk about retention when you've got a poor Muslim girl being attacked, and I saw it on social media. When you look back to when we had the Black Lives Matter campaigns, I was talking to Cressida Dick at the time. She had to keep our black officers away from the front line because they were being abused for being there. How on earth can we get a police force that's reflective of all our different wonderful communities when they're attacked very often from their own communities when they're actually on the front line? That needs to be addressed. But more than anything, we need more money going into the police force. I mean, it could be that perhaps some of these community funds are rediverted to the actual police force because they're nice to haves. But when your fundamental basics aren't right and the basics of their budget is not right, it has to be dealt with as an emergency.
As I've previously said, we've done a lot of work to make sure that we're raising trust and confidence in the police in all communities. This is something that we've been actively doing and working with the police to do so. I think it's really important, as the Deputy Commissioner has said himself, policing is one part of this, but we must make sure that we're doing the other part of the work, which is preventative, community-driven, making sure that we have across all political spectrums. And Chair, you were at the meeting that the Commissioner and the Mayor pulled together where we said how important it was that all spectrums of politicians hold values that are reflective of our brilliant city and reiterate those. I think on the point about making sure that we have funding across the piece, that's why that's so important, because we need to do that preventative work. As I've said previously, we continue to actively talk to government about having increased and sustainable funding for policing. That's something that we haven't shied away from. The Mayor has increased funding to policing.
These words.
He has ensured that now a quarter of funding comes from City Hall. However, we can't shy away from the fact that the majority of police funding comes nationally, and we haven't been, and that's why we've been backing the proposal to increase funding for the current proposal around the Community Security Trust. But we, moreover, have repeatedly said the need for NIC is there. We saw this weekend with the protest, there were 4,000 officers there, as well as supporting the football game that happened. We're all very aware, and I repeatedly talked to ministers and others about this need, and will continue to do so. You have my assurance.
You're repeatedly talking to them. We all remember when the Mayor said, "Oh my goodness, I want to be Mayor again with a Labour government, and everything in the world's going to be wonderful." Well, it's no good you just keep talking to them. We need an uplift in the actual core budget of the police.
Completely agree, and that's why we have seen an uplift of funding.
I'm still talking, not little bits of money here and there. We need their actual basic money put up, because they cannot sustain what they're doing now. They're pinching officers left, right and centre to deal with real issues where they are.
We have seen an increase of funding over the last 2 budgets, and we continue to do that. We've also seen a prioritisation that we fully agree with on neighbourhood policing, and we continue to talk to government about things like the community security project, but moreover what we need. And we're not going to stop or shy away from that. The Mayor was unequivocal in his disappointment to not get more after last budget, and he continues to push forcefully to make sure that we get the policing we deserve.
The Mayor being disappointed doesn't put more money in their funds, does it?
But
I'm going to leave it there, because
it has put more money in their funds over the last 2 years.
Yes, they're going to need a lot more money just to cover the national insurance hike. But anyway, we're running short of time, and I won't stop going on about this, because until you get more money for the police service,
neither will we.
They will not be able to provide what we need.
Lobbied for more funding, and we will continue to.
I'm going on to the next question. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to get my head around the concept of unequivocal disappointment.
Yeah.
But could I ask, on the additional money which is required for the process, so the government has to secure sustainable long-term funding. Obviously, we can't go into the details here, but would you be willing to send a confidential note to the committee outlining the asks which have been made? Because I don't want to take up time here.
Yeah, I mean, we can find a mechanism to share the nature of the ask we've made. We're not, for obvious reasons, Assembly Member, we're not talking about every last detail of,
no, of course.
Of that, but I've given a broad sketch of, more than a sketch of the capabilities and the costs associated. The Mayor and the Deputy Mayor will respond to the questions that are political questions.
Yes.
Of course, in these conversations, I would not want to leave the committee with any sense that we did not feel supported in making our case to government, in truth, across the Assembly, and indeed, well, in many senses across the Assembly, perhaps not universally, but in many senses across the Assembly, and certainly from major political voices, including the Mayor. So I think we all know that we want a Met which keeps pace with the growth of this city. And, we continue to, of course, we make that case to the Mayor. I'm also not going to shrink from that fact. We make the case to the Mayor and Deputy Mayor for those levers that they can pull, but also recognise their support when we seek to point it elsewhere. On your specific request, we have a published, the wider picture is in our published budget position, or in MOPAC's published budget position, and on the narrower point about community protection, we can share correspondence to put more detail on the conversation so far.
Thank you. Is that something that you support, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm assuming, by the way, that we've not heard back from government on this.
Well, I think that I think we've not we've not got certainty. We've had positive conversations. There's been a high level of engagement with the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister. It has been a busy political period, and the question of the end point of those conversations, no, we don't have that. But we, I think there is a very, I should say, I think within the, I don't want to dissect the conversation that's taking place within government. That's for somebody else to do. But the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister, who have been with us, indeed have been with us, to observe protest activity and have been with us to talk through with communities their need for protection, are very alive and responsive to the need we've laid out.
Thank you. A question for the Deputy Mayor then. If the government doesn't back the proposal, either in part or wholly, what's Plan B? Will the Mayor consider putting up GLA funding if needed?
Well, I mean, I've outlined repeatedly today the way in which we're working with and supporting the police, not only with the current proposal. We think that it's a very compelling proposal and that we continue to talk to government about that. We already recognise the £18 million that they're given, as well as the additional £500,000 to Barnet Council to make sure that that work is also being done. But we will obviously assess if and when that happens. But it's important that we know, given the threat level that is being spoken about, that we continue to do all we can.
And does that include a Plan B, which includes the Mayor dipping into reserves in order to fund it, if the government doesn't do so? Because the money has to come from somewhere.
I think, we are talking to government. We think it's compelling. Yep. We're having those active, positive conversations, and we'll, endeavour to look at all things.
I do appreciate that you're talking to government at the moment about the proposals that you put forward. There is the chance, possibly an outside chance, but there is a chance nevertheless that the government will either say, we're not going to either fund this entirely or we're not going to fund it in part. So the question is, where will the funding come from? Will the Mayor step in using reserves? We saw in the recent budget that he was able to magic £142 million overnight out of the business rates reserve on stuff which the Budget Committee had no sight of for the best part of 7 months of line-by-line investigation. So the question, just to be blunt, if the money isn't entirely forthcoming to fund this necessary piece of work, which we all agree is necessary, will the Mayor dip into reserves in order to ensure that the work is done?
Assembly Member Roberts, you're aware that obviously what we're talking about here is sustainable funding.
Yeah.
So, if and when we get to that point, I'm sure there will be conversations. However, one-off funding, as you said, isn't the solution here.
No, it's not. But it's not, but it will help in the short term whilst we make the case for the sustainable funding in the future. If
we're very much talking about hypotheticals, I think what we really want to focus on is making sure that government is active in these conversations and that we're talking to them about having sustainable funding.
Thank you. So there is no Plan B. Thank you.
Assembly Member Wilson, you've touched on your next question. So if you're going to say any more, can you keep it as brief as possible? We're very over time.
I will do my best, Chair,
Thank you.
and I'm sure you'll chivvy me along if I
will,
stray from that.
Without doubt.
So yeah, back to the subject of protest, in particular trying to get a handle on the kind of interaction between protest and these other issues that we've been talking about earlier, and the fact that ongoing protest and some of the things that have been said and effectively for the last 2.5 years have been unchallenged. How, to what extent has that emboldened a culture in which people are now willing and, as we've seen, proven to carry out acts of violence and attack and damage? So, the fact that, and we all know what the chants are, and, I've talked to you on many occasions and the Mayor previously about the robustness of the response to chants like River to the Sea, Globalise the Intifada, Death to the IDF, all those things that we've seen month after month after month and saw in huge levels again on Saturday. So yeah, the question I guess to you, Deputy Commissioner, is I know you've mentioned that you're now taking or looking to take a more robust response against some of those things, but has the fact that up until now that hasn't been the case and that things have effectively been unchallenged, has that enabled and emboldened this environment in which much more devastating attacks have been seen as something that people can do?
Can I start by acknowledging the impact on communities of all of these events, the cumulative impact on the Jewish community, the presence of the protests, and say that experience is very real. That's how people have clearly felt and experienced the last years. But I do have to push back on the point that they have not been unchallenged. So we have made hundreds of arrests, including many for hate crimes and the incitement of racial hatred. We have conditioned marches in many instances across the dozens that have taken place. This weekend we used relatively novel conditions to place an onus on organisers to endeavour to reduce the organised speakers' involvement in inciting racial hatred that has presented as a risk in some of these events. And in the last weekend, made 42 arrests in the course of those events. So I think sometimes the situation is played back quite properly for the impact that has been felt, but it's played back as if nothing had been done to enforce the law and challenge behaviours. And I have to go on record to say that's not accurate, and we have done that on many occasions. We have tested in many of the instances that you've described, including phrases that you referred to directly, the question of whether they could be prosecuted with the Crown Prosecution Service over the last 2.5 years. And we have seen some of those lead directly to prosecutions, and we've seen others not result in charging. It is not a police decision who gets charged. In those cases, it's a CPS decision. We're working in partnership with them, and I'm pleased that together we are able to take that cumulative impact into account, and that will, I believe, lead to increasingly robust challenge of some of the phrases that we've seen. Your question goes directly to causality. I think you were pursuing. I think there are many things operating to create an environment. We know that the online space there are many hundreds of thousands of people who are forming and exercising anti-Semitic perspectives online who are not present in those protests. There are people who are present at those protests who have displayed their anti-Semitic sentiment. All of these things come together in the experience of Jewish communities. So I think it's difficult to draw a straight line. And as I say, we are clear that we must intervene with conditions and with law enforcement to promote the sense of Jewish communities feeling safe. I should say a couple of things about cumulative impact. It is difficult to police out, and the legislation for public order at the moment does not completely take account of the experiences we've had over the last 2.5 years. Former DPP, Lord Ken MacDonald, is reviewing public order legislation. His recommendations, I think, are forming. We are effectively policing with public order legislation from the 1980s, which was built for another period. It was certainly built for a period before the online realities. And so we operate within the law. The law says where that line is drawn. We've tried and we will continue to police as close to that line as possible to promote community safety and their confidence. But if that line needs to move, it's a line that Parliament needs to move, not policing.
In the kind of immediate period after October the 7th, I understand it was announced or suggested that things like jihad has a number of meanings. I mean, is that a statement that is now regretted in the light of where things have gone since then?
So I think there have been some really important moments where we've been able to learn. Assemblymember Small Edwards asked about, how do we reflect on incidents? That's applied to the most serious incidents, which I think was the question, but it's also applied to the policing of protests. So we have seen how we can be even more effective in the use of conditions, even more effective in the deployment for arrests. So we were sharper as these protests have developed in terms of making arrests there and then, getting into crowds and things. It's difficult in big crowds to do that, but we have configured our resources so we're making arrests wherever we can there and then. There's always going to be an instance of online publication of something which we have to go after later. We have involved prosecutors, but we're also thinking about the distinction between a decision to make an arrest and the prospect of a successful prosecution. They're two different things. So there have been all sorts of questions where we've learned in our operating, and communication, which is in part where your question goes, I think is a constant area of review. Trying to explain very complex, whether they're theological, political, or legislative questions in a tweet, I think is something we have found challenging. We probably can look back and say there are times when we've tried to do that, have been unsuccessful, have led to misinterpretation or landed badly. And so we are really focused now on working, particularly with the mainstream media. I know there's a temptation to think the mainstream media is dead. It is really not. We are really active to try to explain the choices we've made, the conditions we're laying out, the law enforcement that's taken place, and we're briefing that in detail to journalists and trying to use our social media to communicate to the public about the events as they're unfolding on the ground. I do think trying to explain, to be very direct to your point, trying to explain the complexity of some of these questions through the medium of a few hundred characters is something which we now look back on and say was we were reaching when we were trying to do that. And I think in the future we think that it's a different way of communicating those points will be more effective. So all those things were done in good faith at the time, but there are lessons about communication which we've definitely learned over the last years.
Sounds almost like a yes. That's great. One more question quickly
Briefly, please.
For you, Commissioner. One condition that I think a lot of us would like to have seen placed on what happened on Saturday was not allowing the march to go past Westminster Synagogue. Deliberately provocative in taking it past that location. Just wonder why that was allowed to take place, given everything we know about the nature of these protests, these marches, and the impact that we've rightly talked about, and the cumulative impact and the feeling that it has on those that are on the receiving end.
As you would expect, and I'm sure you know, we're in active conversation with that synagogue about the impact of these protests. We have been over a period. The route that was conditioned was set out to endeavour to minimise the impact in terms of time and location. I know that has not met the expectation of everybody at that synagogue. We're going to continue that dialogue. There is a reality for us to wrestle together with members of the community there, that people, in order to exercise their democratic rights, want to protest in central London locations. They will not be out here where we are. Maybe they will be on occasions, but not for these purposes. And to create an environment which wholly avoids the public transport networks and the proximity to some of those locations is very difficult. We do recognise the impact we've had, as others have, extensive correspondence on this question, and we'll continue the conversation. We need to hear from that community about the experience. And since we had set out conditions that were intended to minimise, as far as they could, some of those impacts, we need to understand if those have not had that effect over the course of last weekend. But it's certainly our intention to acknowledge the cumulative impact on that location in particular.
Thank you. Very, very, very quickly, Assemblymember Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point. It is absolutely fundamental that we all in this chamber call out anti-Semitism and any kind of racism whatsoever, whatever kind of hate that is. It was heartening to see Assemblymember Wilson calling out anti-Semitism in the way that he has. I wonder if at some point he'd like to take the opportunity to call out his own National Party leader on the 30 counts of anti-Semitism that people have personally experienced from him.
I don't think it's fair to actually ask the Deputy Commissioner or anybody else to answer that.
I was actually asking the Assembly member,
but
Chair.
that's not the...
I've no doubt,
both of
I
you.
have no doubt
Both of
that the
you.
panel will agree
Stop.
that it's inappropriate for
Stop now.
people
Assembly
in
member Ahmed.
those levels, at those levels,
it.
to come out and make the kind of comments that they have and their action in the past.
We are going to pause for 5 minutes, so we'll be back here at 12, so it'll be a very quick pause, I'm afraid. We will be taking up the questions on the Epstein-related allegations, so we'll go straight on to the live racial, beg your pardon, live facial recognition. Okay, so back here at 12 o'clock, please. Welcome back to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. We're going to continue now with our question and answer session with the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service and our Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. So we're now talking about live facial recognition, and we're starting off with Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and now good afternoon, Deputy Mayor and Deputy Commissioner. My question again is to the Deputy Commissioner. Following the High Court's ruling, will the use of live facial recognition be expanded across London by the Met?
Thank you very much for the question. I mean, we welcome that important ruling on the lawfulness and the compliance with human rights law of our use of live facial recognition. So recognition that it's being used in a way which is clear, precise, and effective. And I can talk a bit more about effectiveness in a few moments. But to be clear, this is a tool which is helping us safeguard London. We are making arrests that I'm confident would not have been made otherwise. So in one of the most recent arrests, somebody who'd been unlawfully at large for 20 years had obviously got on with life undetected effectively. There are numerous examples like that, and in very high volume, the arrest of perpetrators of violence against women and girls and registered sex offenders in breach of their conditions in communities. So we had assessed, at a level of confidence that we could deploy with the support of London. I should say 80% of Londoners expressing their support for the use of this technology. That's been underpinned and our use of it validated by the recent judgment. And so we will continue to look to deploy the technologies subject to affordability. We would like to do more of it. We particularly have looked closely at the insights from a pilot in Croydon, where for 6 months we used static cameras in Croydon town centre. That's similar but different to the use of the vans, which we deploy most of the technology in. Across the deployments of that technology, we made 173 arrests, and we've seen crime reductions in the area, and particularly also a reduction in the time that suspects are outstanding. So we find people quicker. They're brought to justice quicker. Their potential risk to the victims of their crimes reduced by the fact they're brought to justice. So all of those are reasons why we would, yes, in answer to your question, want to continue to use this technology, think about where it can be used in static settings, and in particular, we are keen to mobilise a new application of the technology, which is to put it in the hands of officers themselves. So that would be different to the kind of scanning of the street, but to allow officers to be able to check the identity of individuals they encounter quickly using facial recognition and an officer-initiated facial recognition, as it is called. So we see this technology being important. It's been a foundational part of our use of precision policing, and we have seen, for example, more than 100 sex offenders, breaches of their conditions detected, and now over 2,000 arrests since the start of 2024.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner, the weekend marked the first time that live facial recognition was used at a protest. Do you envisage the technology becoming a regular feature at protests in London?
Thanks for the question, because it's an important opportunity for clarification. We used the live facial recognition away from the protest site. We used it at a point of high footfall. We built watch lists which were typical of the watch lists we've used before, so people with conditions around the registered sex offenders who are subject conditions and those who are wanted by the courts or by us. So it was not in that sense unusual. It was very typical. There had been some people who were wanted for offences from previous events. In fact, we made 3 arrests. None of them were related to the protests, it's worth saying. They were for people who'd failed to appear at court. And so we will treat carefully the interaction of that technology and its potential to safeguard the public. There were this weekend, I mean, it's worth saying, just to put in context for a second, the weekend that we just had, you know, it's something upwards of 80,000 people on the streets in relation to the protests. You know, some very opposing factions within that who we managed to keep apart to the greater extent, and an FA Cup final and protests in relation to the situation in Iran, and I could keep going on. And so our deployment was intended to deliver and support overall safety in the capital, as well as to acknowledge that there had been some violence in the September protests that we'd seen that were associated with this weekend's activities. So we saw value this weekend. We see value in general. We know that sometimes the purpose of the technology is misunderstood. And we recognise that we're engaged. As soon as we start talking about protest, we're engaging not just people's rights to go about their daily life, but their other rights. So we will treat that. I think we will treat that with care. We treat those rights with care. I don't want to preclude that we will use the technology again, but I don't want to create the expectation that it will be routinely deployed. And in particular, because the operational requirement for its deployment may not be present in other protests. We are principally using it, as I say, as a tool to enforce people's conditions or arrest already wanted people. And in general, that is something which there are better in other locations than protests to achieve that. If it feels like it's relevant to do that adjacent to protests, we wouldn't rule it out again.
Yeah, unfortunately, that FA Cup final didn't go the way that I was hoping, I'm afraid. So in terms of the arrests, you said there were 3 arrests made using the facial recognition technology at the weekend. Were any of those arrested planning on attending a protest or coming back from a protest?
No, we don't believe they were.
Thank you. And you said the technology might be used kind of adjacent to protests in the future. How would the decision be made around which protests or which protests aren't included in terms of live facial recognition? Because I think what we don't want is a perception that it's being used for some protests or not for others. How do you ensure that it's used kind of without fear or favour?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I mean, I think there is implicit in quite a lot of the commentary that the idea that to be fair, you have to do the same thing for everybody or at every moment, and that I would refute. You have to apply the same principles and use the same mechanism to make your judgments, and sometimes that leads to different outcomes. So the decision-making for the deployment is a structured process, including the decision-making for the watch lists that are built. So location and watch list are critical to the way the technology impacts the public. And the starting point for the question of using this alongside the weekends where we have high footfall and the potential for disorder will sit with our goal commanders. So those who are responsible for building the policing operation to deal with protest and public safety will have in mind the question of whether they think the deployment of live facial recognition could promote public safety and help us bring perpetrators of offences to justice, and whether that's appropriate in the context of the other things that are taking place. If they do, we'll move into the next stage, which is to go through that rigorous process and just to say again, the process that the courts have validated for setting appropriate safeguards around the deployment of the technology. And I am preparing the committee and I guess the wider public for the prospect that that will mean those thresholds are met in some cases and they're not met in others, because we would not be approaching these questions diligently if we had some kind of blanket approach.
Yeah, because last September in this very committee, I raised the question of it being used at Notting Hill Carnival, but it wasn't used at the Unite the Kingdom protests that September. Obviously, this time around, it was used adjacent to a Unite the Kingdom protest. I was wondering why there was this difference between what happened last year and what happened at the weekend. Thank
you. I mean, so just to deal with adjacency very quickly, I mean, I think we did a version of what was done last weekend at Carnival. In fact, as you know, it was not in the Carnival footprint. It was away. It was a transport hub. So I was at Paddington with a team specifically when they were there over the Carnival weekend. So we want to, and there's some practical reasons for that in terms of the way the technology deploys and taking action as well. But we would, I suppose, reflect, to be very clear about your point, what's different now than September. In September, we saw violence, we saw outbreaks of violence at that protest. And so, there was a clear indication that was a prospect this weekend, clearer even than it was before. Now, others will have a view in terms of whether they had anticipated that, but there are many weekends of protests that go by with all sorts of forms of contested chanting and banners, but actually the outbreaks of violence in those events are relatively fewer, and so September stood out against those.
Deputy Commissioner, could you just confirm how many arrests were made at the United Kingdom protests at the weekend?
So we have got, let me just turn, if I may, just to make sure I get, after our conversation already, we made 42 arrests in total at the weekend. There were 20 at the United Kingdom event, 12 at the Nakba Day event. 10 of the arrests at the United Kingdom event were for public order offences. There were breaches in the Nakba related event. There were breaches of public order conditions, one instance of support for a prescribed organisation, and public order offences. And people were also arrested for failing to remove face coverings. So a spread of offences across the two events.
Thank you very much for your answers, Deputy Commissioner. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, may I just say one other thing, because it's just complete my answer to the Assembly member.
Briefly,
it's worth saying as well, we have not finished making arrests in relation to those events. So there are instances of material which has been published online, or things which we have since detected, which will continue to attract policing. And I mentioned one of those over the weekend where we made an arrest for the display of a banner.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hamdash.
Thank you, Chair. So I appreciated the comments from the Deputy Commissioner earlier about the role of big tech, the need for accountability and thoughtfulness about big tech's influence. And I hope it applies to the tech that the police themselves deploy. So I'd like to know what specific safeguards has the Met put in place as the use of live facial recognition continues to evolve and expand?
Thank you very much. So yeah, we're serious about the trust and confidence questions around the use of this technology and others, and that has meant, in particular, endeavouring to work with a range of organisations. In some cases, we've ended up working with them through the courts, but we had also set out anyway to develop relationships with organisations like Big Brother Watch and Liberty, with political stakeholders. We're regularly engaging locally also on the question, so we're deploying into local borough communities, and therefore engagement locally is important, and that has led to our insight that 80% of Londoners express support for the technologies. We have been tested and challenged in relation to the fairness and equity of the technologies themselves, and that led us to work with the National Physical Laboratory to look at the accuracy and outcomes of the technology when we look at that through the lens of gender and race, and the technology has stood up well to that challenge. And we have also been in regular conversations with London's Policing Ethics panel, with the various commissioners and regulators that sit at a national level for data processing and for biometrics. So it feels to us a very well scrutinised and heavily scrutinised. I haven't mentioned, but should, the role of the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime, who have taken regular briefings on the development of the technology and its deployment. So we have those steps in place that sit outside us. And then, as I've already alluded to, a rigorous approach internally at present to make sure we maintain that level of scrutiny of our own deployments and our own application of the technologies. the scale of activity has obviously grown, so that you've seen the numbers of arrests increase. But just to give you a sense of what's actually happening. So 3 LFR vans at present delivering about 6 to 8 deployments every week, and we think that in the period we've been running, if I just take the last year, about 3 million faces scanned. Those don't get turned into pictures, they get turned into numbers. And that resulted in 12 alerts, which were false, to use any sort of common description of it, and none of those led to an arrest. So we're seeing a tool which, compared to policing's use of suspicion, which is at the core of much of our activity, is precise, we know is fair, and we know is bringing about positive outcomes for the public. We feel very well scrutinised and regulated in this space. And, as I've described for other things, we'll continue to expose ourselves to that scrutiny.
Thank you. I do just want to dig in a little bit more, because I want to know whether or not you think the current oversight and legislative framework is adequate as the Met expands its use of technologies, including live record recognition and AI-led tools, particularly when the scrutiny of AI is particularly hard, when it's hard to understand decisions that algorithms are making in a complex space. So if you think they're not adequate, what changes are required? So I think we feel strongly supported by the judgments the courts have reached in this case and in earlier cases on the core of the legality of the use of the tools, and the recent judgment reinforces that with a validation of the approach we're taking in relation to human rights. So we don't, in our week in, week out work, feel a big gap in the legislation that exists. We do know that obviously government have consulted on that question relatively recently. We're waiting for outcomes from that. And it may be that others conclude that a framework is required other than the frameworks that already deal with data processing, equalities, with biometrics. We don't particularly feel a gap. We feel there's law we can stand on and be held to account through. But if Parliament decides it wants to frame something, if the government and then Parliament decide they want to frame something which steers public authorities or policing's use of these technologies, then obviously we will work with them to do that. The one thing I would say is I am nervous about any form of legislation that is too precise and prescriptive around one technology in one moment in time, because the technology is evolving, our practice is evolving. We would never have imagined 10 years ago we'd be in the situation we're in now with the capable technology that we have, and start getting into AI, it's a whole nother world that was absolutely not in view. So I think legislating for this with sufficient flexibility to allow our operational deployment of technology to be effective would be important. And we know that our accountability for the use of that already comes through other mechanisms as well. So again, for brevity, we don't really perceive a gap. If there's a gap that needs to be closed, we would prefer it was closed in a way which didn't stand too firmly on current technologies and current questions, but allowed for both operational flexibility and the development of technology, which, I should also just, we are not in the business of simply surveilling the population. We're in the business of keeping communities safe. And so we go after these technologies because of the impact they have on community safety. And we would want any future legislation to weigh that in the balance against those other rights which are engaged, because, of course, a fundamental right is to live safely in your community.
Okay, thank you. I've got 3 more people wanting to talk. I've got 6 minutes, so that's 2 each. First, Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Commissioner, given that the first court case was Liberty and South Wales, where after it been LFR had been deployed in South Wales, and the Met has gone way beyond the judge's recommendations in that case, and the various court cases that have been taken since, and you've also talked about the scrutiny that this technology has. Very simple question. Does live facial recognition technology keep Londoners safer?
Yeah, I'm confident it does. I'm confident that it's making an active weekly contribution to taking people who present a risk to our communities off the streets. And in particular, it has proved to be effective in taking people who had evaded justice and would have evaded the glancing eye of a passing police officer, but are being removed from our streets. And that means 1,500 people who've been charged or cautioned as a result. And just to put it in, 24% of the people we dealt with through LFR are perpetrators of violence against women and girls. So that's the contribution it's making. Proud of the work we did in South Wales to get it on to start the process of getting it on a foothold of consistent practice. We built on that in London, and Londoners are safer because of the deployment of this technology.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, when it comes to the deployment of live facial recognition, earlier the Police Commissioner had commented that using it at protests could have a very chilling effect. Now, you and I disagree on live facial recognition. I think we should put it everywhere. I know you are less enthusiastic. But can you see the specific problem, without getting into it too much today, of what we had with the protests at the weekend, where it was decided to use it at Euston and King's Cross, specifically the meet points for the Unite the Kingdom march, but not at Green Park, where the Palestine Solidarity March was taking place? Do you recognise the way in which this may be viewed as two-tier policing by the public, and so having to be extremely careful with this and these techniques as we go forward?
I mean, as the Deputy Commissioner just outlined, I think, the use of LFR has to consider a myriad of things and evidence and use and actually as you said, it was used adjacent to the protest. It wasn't within the protest footprint. I think it's really important that at all points there's a rationale for using it. And there's transparency.
I just want to say more politically. Do you understand your political, with a political hat on? Not the police are going to do the police work. I'm saying can you see on the public perception why we have to be very careful with this? This is more a political question for you to understand the danger if we're seen to deploy this again and again at some marches and not at others. Do you see there could be tensions created by that? I fundamentally believe that protests have to be able to be facilitated. They're the cornerstone of our democracy, and the police have to, make sure that they're policing those without fear or favour. In the operational update, Chair, may I answer a question? But I don't think you're answering the specific question.
It's a bit of a word salad.
And I know the Chair wants to get on. So that's
I do.
But because I really want to make one brief point quickly to you, Matt, if I can, because it hasn't been spoken about yet. And I think it's really important that in the case of Mr. Thompson that went to the court, that was obviously because he'd been misidentified as his brother, which is not something new in the world of policing. And I know certainly from growing up that if you had a bit of a dodgy brother or sister, you would often be picked up by local police officers and they'd mistake your identity. But can you just at least, have you learned at least from that case, because it doesn't make it any less awful for Mr. Thompson, who was wrongly stopped, have you learned from that case how to stop that happening in future?
So we've had a small number of examples of twins. I mean, it's an obvious risk, but it's obviously also a sort of a vanishingly small risk when put against the whole population, particularly for identical twins. The key learning we take from this technology into all other applications of technology is there will always be a human decision maker. So this tech doesn't make arrests. It presents information to officers who then make choices. And in the same way as people have given their siblings details. People are, many police officers have had that experience of, being given duff details, as we call it, or, and cross wires and misidentification is not new. Exactly as you said, Assembly Member Bessie, it has happened before. This technology is more precise in many ways than policing instinct on that question, but policing instinct must follow. And so, checks on whatever ID people have got available, the checks on home address, all of those things are an important part of checking and testing the next phase after that information's presented. It was not, that's not a new consideration after that case, but it is one which is, of course, we can reinforce that afterwards. And in all of our use of these technologies, keeping, as the sort of jargon goes, keeping the human in the loop is an important part of our decision making.
Thank you. Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts, very quickly, and if I could have a very short answer, please.
Deputy Mayor, has MOPAC and by extension you reviewed the overt live facial recognition policy, and are you happy with it?
Yes, so we sit on the Metropolitan Police's Facial Technology Board. We've worked with the London Policing Ethics Panel to look at their work on LFR and oversight. We've also, as the Deputy Commissioner mentioned, regularly polled Londoners to understand their work, their understanding and happiness with the use of LFR, which, as they said, has come back relatively positive at 80%. And we've also, through the work we're doing in the community scrutiny panels, also extended that to include LFR. So yes, we regularly have, and we've also, as previously on a previous question, mentioned we've fed into the government's consultation.
If I may, because I'm getting cheered by the chair. So MOPAC says that the use of LFR is an operational decision for the Met, yes? Yes?
Yes.
Does MOPAC review each of these decisions to deploy LFR to see if they are within the overt LFR policy guidelines? How frequently does that happen?
We've asked for an annual report on LFR so that we can collate all of that information and look at it on a strategic basis.
So once a year, not on a case-by-case basis?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And that brings that to an end. I have to confess, I'm a massive fan of live facial recognition. I think it does make a huge difference. We're now going to be talking about the Met's technology contracts and procurement, and we're going to start off with Assembly Member Hamdash.
Great, thank you. So what governance, safeguards and independent oversight mechanisms are in place to ensure that the Palantir pilot is used proportionately and fairly?
Thank you. The Met has met on MOPAC has met with the Met on several occasions as part of our regular oversight to understand and scrutinise the arrangements under the Palantir pilot, including critical issues around data security, governance, equalities, and the effective decision-making, i.e. not automating those critical decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I just to add a little to that. We have given the most senior level of attention to the pilot of this technology in the Met. I think there's probably a risk of conflation of several technologies. Important to say that what we have done so far on questions around culture and standards has largely been the application of data aggregation, so bringing together and then extracting data from 30 different existing data sets. And the reason I make that point, Assembly Member, is we already had this data. We just were struggling to, with the mass of it, connect it and get insight from it. And so that process has been enhanced by using the technologies. I can talk about the outcomes from the recent pilot, but we are applying, strict conditions in accordance with GDPR legislation to make sure that we have got data sovereignty and the integrity of that dealt with, including the scrutiny as we apply to a lot of other systems. I mean, we have, of course, we have a whole set of public-private partnerships around technology, and questions of safeguards and security, data security and encryption, all of those are incredibly important to us. So the same scrutiny we apply internally to that has been applied to this pilot.
Can I just come in on that? So when looking at a potential provider for the data need, what degree is given to the issues of human rights records and kind of ethical procurement when you're looking for a solution in this space?
So in this case, excuse me, in this case, where we had a clear operational need, we turned to accessible technologies that we could test and pilot in a timely way, and we went as a result to one of government's procurement frameworks, the G-Cloud 14 framework, which lists thousands of suppliers, but for this purpose, relatively few, and we have worked through that process to identify those that could provide this technology in a ready way. So our focus is on making sure we've got commercial integrity, on making sure we've got the data integrity that I've described, and we have therefore gone to, for this pilot, a provider that is already widely used across government. And to put that in context, I think at the latest count, about 72 NHS trusts using Palantir. I am not here to advocate for Palantir. I'm here to respond to your question about whether this is appropriate in the public sector. And that question has been resolved by the presence of the supplier on government frameworks and the very widespread use by something that might be approaching 1/3 of NHS trusts of the technologies. We are aware, of course, I'm not kind of putting completely out of view the debate about the provider, but we have satisfied ourselves that this is technology which can make an impact on the integrity of the Met, the way that we've applied it so far, and trust and confidence in the Met. And whilst we've noted the wider debate, I think it's worth also acknowledging that we partner from a whole set of global technology companies. I am sure that if you went through the exercise of finding out if everybody found all of their other customers attractive, there would be questions elsewhere. We have to work with technologies that are available, and we are content with the balance that we've struck.
Just one last from me. Is Palantir offering this pilot at a discounted rate?
Well, I mean, we can be very clear about the cost of the pilot. The latest extended 3 months pilot cost 489, just short of 490,000 pounds. The previous was at a lower value of just short of 10,000 pounds. It's a short-term pilot. We don't have a comparison to make in terms of whether that's a discount or not. We obviously, I mean, you would expect us to try and drive out public value in all the spending we do. So we've tried to get the best outcome for the lowest price. I think we are an exceptional use case in terms of UK law enforcement, and so we don't have a direct comparison to hold up against it. And you can. The commercial documentation of this is much of that is already available. We can certainly put any more detail to that that's appropriate to share with this committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. This is to the Deputy Commissioner. How is the Met assessing and mitigating the privacy and accountability implications of using Palantir, including preventing inappropriate monitoring, algorithmic bias or over-reliance on automated risk flagging? And how is public confidence going to be protected?
Thank you very much. Can I go back to the why just
Yeah, sure.
for a second? So we have 30 different data systems that describe the behaviour as mirrored in their digital life of all of our colleagues, including me. And what we know is that public trust and confidence is undermined when standards are eroded. And the process we've undertaken over the last months have been intended to go after, in particular, serious levels of misconduct and abuses of our policies. So we have seen serious misconduct and criminality identified, including the abuse of authority for sexual purposes, fraud. We've seen what will be allegations of misconduct in public office or misuse of our systems. We've looked at officers. I want to just dwell for a point, and we talked a lot about 4,000 officers working hard at the weekend. So I'm talking about those minority of officers. 98 now, we're looking at misconduct or gross misconduct questions about abuse of our rostering systems. People who have not been as present in the workplace as they should have been, including senior leaders who we can identify as not having been present. And the committee will know about the stance we've taken on the declaration of membership of organisations, including the Freemasons. And we've identified 12 instances where we think people's failure to declare that membership is now going to be scrutinised further. So we've been dealing with unacceptable, dishonest, corrosive behaviours through this technology. That's the why in this use case. You asked about surveillance and algorithmic bias and automated decision making. We of course, like we did with LFR, continue to learn about the application of these technologies, and critical to that is putting the human in the loop. So on the last point about automated decision making, all of this work so far has identified candidates for greater scrutiny. None of it has led to an automatic outcome, and I've described processes that are underway still to test the evidence in individual cases, investigations that will follow, challenges which will be left there for people whose administration has maybe been poor on things like duties management, but real scrutiny of people who are, for example, grooming colleagues, in a completely unacceptable way. But we have a decision-making process which remains in place for those. So not automatic in terms of end outcomes. It has presented candidates. We'll learn about how it's done that through those processes. To go to the point about algorithmic bias, what has largely happened in this pilot is the connection of information. So there isn't actually that different use of the word AI, but a lot of this is data aggregation and extraction. So it's connecting up dots. It is not particularly susceptible to things like hallucination and the other problems that are associated with AI. Most of what we used in this pilot AI for is summarizing longer forms of text and documents, so something you'd be very familiar with, and lower risk. On the surveillance point, I think I need to be sort of unflinching at one level in response to the question. You expect high standards of police officers in London, and so do I. And that means that the traffic of data on your work devices, your phone and your laptop at work, is monitored through a process of lawful business monitoring. The access in and out of our buildings is monitored through electronic control. And this technology has not placed anybody under any additional surveillance in the workplace than they already were. What it has allowed us to do, with some degree of precision and some learning to have going forward, is to identify where people may not have carried out their work or may not have conducted themselves in the way you would hope and I would.
Okay, thank you. I'm concerned that and I've mentioned this already today, this sort of idea of reputational risk. And there has been damaging allegations made about the Met over the last year or so. Do you not see the reputational risk for the Metropolitan Police from contracting with a company which has its own reputational issues, particularly when it just squeaks under the threshold for mayoral involvement in the pricing of the contract? I mean, even that looks questionable. 490,000 against 500,000 limit for mayoral involvement. Do you not see the reputational risks which should be flashing on the dashboard like no one's business?
So the reputational question, which has been in front of us, is someone you've alluded to on a couple of occasions, is that the misconduct of a minority of officers and the development of cultures which go into some larger numbers, particularly in pockets of those cultures, goes undetected. That has been the biggest threat to trust and confidence in the Met in the last 3 or 4 years. And these technologies are supporting us going after that question, as well as in future other technologies. And we've talked about one which we're working with in LFR, and we haven't talked about, but I could talk about drones and other things, which are technologies which we believe will serve to safeguard London and its trust and confidence in policing. So that is the risk that is right in front of us reputationally. We know we are using a divisive supplier in this pilot. We are being scrutinised for that. We have weighed those risks you've described.
This may come into a future question, the what steps you took so I will leave that there, if I may. One last question for the Deputy Mayor. Is it time to change the thresholds to ensure that the Mayor can act more decisively, given the fact that he has said that, or suggested that Palantir is a company which doesn't align with London's values? He didn't say it directly about them, but he, in relation to. Is it time to change the thresholds?
Are you asking about the threshold in relation to the scheme of delegation?
Scheme of delegation, yep.
I think it's important to reflect that the Met's budget is £4 billion, and the scheme of delegation is already anything over 500,000,
yep.
Or anything that could be seen as novel or contentious. Okay. So currently, that's not something we feel needs review.
Would the Mayor like to be intervening in this matter?
In the pilot?
In this particular issue, yeah. In the issue of a 500,000 threshold, would the Mayor like to intervene?
No, we're comfortable with where
Fair
the scheme
enough.
of delegation sits.
Different to what he said in The Guardian, but there we are. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to expand on that because that was my next question. So in relation to the procurement of this contract, it was reported that the Mayor had no say on it at all as it fell below the threshold. That's correct. Good. And relating to what my colleague has said, a spokesman for the Mayor was quoted as saying, as a general point, the Mayor would have concerns about using public money to support firms who act contrary to London's values. What does that mean? What does it mean?
What does it mean in terms of contrary to London's values?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that the Mayor outlined a definition of what London's values are, but I think we've talked a lot about them today in terms of tolerance,
No, but why does
diversity.
this contract? Why is this contract contrary to London values? What does that mean?
That's not what he said. He didn't say that the contract
Well,
was
it's a direct quote.
contrary. He didn't say that the contract was.
Public doesn't want to use public money to support firms who act contrary to London's values.
What I can say is that's why we have made sure that there has been the right level of oversight on things in relation to data protection, in terms of making sure, as we've discussed, that it's not automated decision making. We have obviously had continual conversations around governance and equalities in that space, which would align with London's values.
I think you're missing the point. The GLA itself is currently rolling out success factors and the HR suite produced by the IT company SAP. The Mayor is paid his salary through SAP systems. SAP is a major provider to both the Israeli MOD and the Israeli Defence Force. So is the Mayor going to speak out about that? Do you think?
It's really important
Possibly.
that we are talking about enacting contracts with public money that fit in legislative frameworks. We know that the Procurement Act of 2023 purposely stops us picking and choosing suppliers we want to award and limiting the grounds on what suppliers can be excluded. And it's in that we'll be taking any decisions.
Amazing. Well, I must say, I think this is extremely good. If the Mayor wants the wrong uns, if you like, to be taken out of the police force as soon as possible, and we all do, because it damages their trust and confidence in the police service, which we can't, and none of us can afford that. If this system is going to work, then jolly good. I'd like to know at some point what London's values to do with that actually means, but given that we have not got the time to do that, I'm going to briefly go now to Assembly Member Ahmed, and then Desai is afterwards.
Chair, could I come in after Assembly Member Desai, please?
Yes, although I will have a hard stop in about 10 minutes. Assembly Member Desai.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. My question is to you, Deputy Mayor. So the Met has said that the use of new technologies is intended to strengthen culture, integrity, and public confidence. How will MOPAC measure whether these steps are improving standards and rebuilding public trust?
Thank you, Assembly Member Desai. You'll know that improving the trust and confidence of Londoners is something that we've worked closely with the Met upon. It's why we do the public attitude survey to understand the trust and confidence of Londoners. We have worked closely with them, especially post Charing Cross and the Dr. Daniels report, to make sure that both internally and externally that we're doing all we can to make sure that all Londoners have trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police. And we have worked with them to improve the vetting misconduct standards that have led to thousands of officers that none of us would see as fit to serve being removed from the police service. And so we fully stand behind that. In relation to this pilot, as I said, we've met with the Metropolitan Police Service several times to understand the pilot moreover, but to understand the crucial issues around data security, governance, equalities, and effective decision-making.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't actually about the technology contracts. I just want to thank the Met, through the Deputy Commissioner, for the work of the police officers on Saturday. Now, I was actually out one of your teams in Lambeth on Saturday afternoon, and I saw how they were reacting with the public, with, you know, it's just after the protests had finished, with protesters, and I cannot commend enough the professionalism that I saw and noted. And I mean, one of the reasons that I was out there that afternoon was because in September, as you will be aware, Deputy Commissioner, one of the hospitals in London, St Thomas's, falls within Lambeth, within my own constituency, and we had this appalling spectacle of people from the so-called Unite the Kingdom March coming and congregating outside in the forecourt of the hospital and stopping black and brown members of staff who'd done really long shifts as NHS members within the hospital from going home because of the intimidation and harassment that they caused. It was really sad, though, on Saturday to have to see the massive barriers across St Thomas's and the extra security staff that they had to pay for out their own budget to ensure that that didn't happen again, to protect their own staff. But I do want to absolutely commend your officers for their actions on Saturday. And I know how difficult it was. You had two major marches. You had the FA Cup final, which sadly I didn't even know the score about until right at the end of the day. But I was too busy talking to your officers and just watching and observing their interactions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I say in 30 seconds that one of the reasons we are so keen to connect the points, to use the technology to make sure everyone makes their fullest contribution at the highest standards to policing London is because we want them to be alongside the brilliant officers who you've seen. We want those brilliant officers to feel supported by us intervening to make sure everyone's playing their active part at the right standards. But, you know, to come back to where you started, really extraordinary. And over the last period, I was in one of our command units last week talking to colleagues about the level of disruption to their professional and personal life that has been brought about. And just to acknowledge, I talked about the racial harassment of some of our colleagues. That extends, of course, to other professionals. And in that work being done by Lord MacDonald, you know, this question of what it does to the capital to have this repeated and cumulative effect, both in terms of the level of disruption to services, the cost to services, and the cost to communities, is something that we hope will be taken account of. In the meantime, 4,000 brilliant women and men will be out there doing the work that's done. And if I can read into the record as well as your appreciation for that, which we value, is that amongst them were officers from around the country. We think basically every police force in the country, certainly 30 support units from around the country, who also played their part in that. So we shouldn't diminish that. There are ripples that go out from this, and the brilliant officers who've been doing neighbourhood protection work in northwest London over the last period, some of those will have been out trying to keep those, you know, difficult events apart and keep people safe. Thank you for your reflection on that.
Thank you. And we must remember that if we had sufficient officers, we wouldn't have to rely on so many other services, which goes back to my point. We need more police officers, not less. Can I also say it is very nice for this committee to have such a senior officer here answering questions. We are very, very grateful, because clearly our Deputy Mayor can't always answer the operational questions. So we're very grateful for that. Just a reminder, Deputy Mayor, we need that data on specific anti-Semitism training, both the funding and the KPIs, as asked for by Assembly Member Best. And I will lead this on something I know the whole committee agrees. I hope this situation with these two members gets resolved on the basis so many have written to me saying they thought they were joining the police force, and that's what they wanted to do. And given that we cannot seem to get enough police officers or people that want to join the police at the moment, the fact that we're almost giving them away is atrocious. But anyway, thank you. So I'd like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC? Thank you. And can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 11th of May? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 3rd of June 2026 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
Broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London